If I can have your attention, please. We'll ask everyone to please be seated at this time. We're about to begin the services from Mr. Morey Slodki. We welcome all of you that have joined us online as well. The services will be officiated by Rabbi Barry Axler. And I would just like to mention that immediately following the service here at the chapel, we will be processing to the graveside, which is not far from the chapel here, to witness the interment, and we can all participate as well. And then the Shiva will be observed at the Chicago Loop Synagogue at 16 South Clark Street in Chicago today from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. with Mariv at 5:15 p.m. And there is parking instructions in the folder you received. Rabbi.
Our Jewish funeral service begins with the Kriyah, or tearing the black ribbon. It's a custom that dates back to two biblical moments. First, when Jacob saw what he thought was the blood of Joseph on his coat of many colors, the Bible says that he tore his clothes. And then many years later, when King David learned that his eldest son, Avshalom, had been killed, in his grief, he fell to the floor and also tore his clothes. So this expression of tearing has been part of our Jewish funeral service now for over 3,000 years. And the external tearing has come to symbolize the broken fabric and the broken hearts in our lives. And Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Dayan ha'emet. Oh, blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who is the one judge of all truth. It's the measure of a man. And not how did he die, but how did he live? And not what did he gain, but what did he give? These are the units to measure the worth of a man as a man, regardless of his birth. Not what was his station, but had he a heart? And how did he play his God-given part? Was he ever ready with a word of good cheer to bring back a smile or banish a tear? Not what was his shrine, nor what was his creed, but had he befriended those really in need? And not what did the sketch in the newspaper say, but how many were sorry when he passed away. He is gone. And you can shed tears that he is gone, or you can smile because he has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that he has left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see him, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember him and only that he is gone, or you can cherish his memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind and be empty and turn your back, or you could do what he would want. Smile, open your eyes, love, and go on. At times like this, words fail us, and so we turn to our Psalms, and if you can, in your booklets, please join me in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepares a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. A life well lived cannot be diminished by death. The beauty, the guidance, and the inspiration it gave us will shine on as brightly as ever. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal, but life leaves a memory no one can steal. In the play Wicked, there's a very powerful line that has an impact on our service today for Morey. I know we are who we are today because we knew you. And because we knew you, we are changed forever. There is a midrash, or Jewish legend, that relates the following story. Two ships were once seen near land. One of them was leaving the harbor, and the other was coming into it. Everyone was cheering for the outgoing ship, giving it a hearty send-off. But the incoming ship was scarcely noticed. A wise man standing nearby offered this comment. Rejoice not, he said, over the ship that is setting out to sea, for you know not what destiny awaits it, what storms it may encounter, what dangers lurk before it. Rejoice rather over the ship that has reached port safely and brought back all of its passengers in peace. It is the way of the world that when a human being is born, all rejoice, but when he dies, all sorrow. Perhaps it could be the other way around. No one can tell what trouble awaits the developing child on its journey through life. But when a man has lived and dies in peace, all should rejoice, for he has completed his journey successfully, and he is departing from this world with the imperishable crown of a good name. That was our Moshe Eliyahu Ben Chaim. That was our Morey Slodki. The way he lived his life, he deserved our faith's most important honor, Keter Shem Tov, the crown of a good name. In describing the passing of our first matriarch, Sarah, or the biblical figure Joseph, the Bible says that Sarah lived to be 127 years old, and Joseph lived to be 110 years old. But what the Bible doesn't say is that Sarah died or Joseph died, but that Sarah lived and Joseph lived, underscoring that what is most important in life is how we live and not how we die. Morey lived a wonderful life of love for his wife Elaine. He lived a wonderful life of love for his children Nina and Steve and Lisa. He lived a wonderful life of love for his grandson Harry. He lived a wonderful life of love for his brother William. And he lived a wonderful life of love for his extended family and his many, many friends. Our tradition teaches us that when we pass on, we leave behind only two things. And they are two Hebrew words that not only sound alike, but they come from the same root. One is Yerusha, and the other is Morasha. Now, Yerusha are your material assets. They're your bank accounts or your real estate holdings or your stocks and bonds. But Morasha, the characteristics about yourself that you leave behind for family and friends who love you and who will miss you. I don't know, nor do I care to know, what Morey's Yerusha was. But after spending time with the family, I can tell you what his Morasha was. It was an unconditional love for his family. It was a reaching out and caring for others. And it was an incredible zest for life. You know, in the very first words of the Bible, which we're familiar with, it says, "Let there be light." And there was light. But it wasn't until day 4 that God creates the sun and the moon. So if God creates the sun and the moon on day 4, what was this light that God was talking about in the very first sentences. So I believe that light was the light of God. And since the world wasn't complete, God put that light into each and every one of us. And when we lead good lives and when we care for others, that light shines forth and makes this world better. Every single person here knew that Morey had that light. And when it shone forth and hit you, it inspired you to do better and to be better. On the drive up this morning from the city, 2 songs came over the radio that really touched me for this service today. The first was a song by James Taylor, "How Sweet It Is to Being Loved by You." How sweet it was for all of us to be loved by Morey. And the second song was a 1960s hit song by Burt Bacharach and Hal David, and sung by Dionne Warwick. Always something there to remind me. We will always have something there to remind us of Morey. For as the song concludes, "For how can I forget you when there is always something there to remind me? I was born to love you, and I will never be free because you'll always be a part of me." I was very, very moved by all the things that the family shared with me about Morey. So I'd like to share with you a very personal and a very special poem whose message I know Morey Slodki would have embraced. It's entitled, "If I Knew." If I knew it would be the last time that I'd see you fall asleep, I would tuck you in more tightly, and I'd pray the Lord your soul to keep. If I knew it would be the last time that I'd see you walk out the door, I'd give you a hug and a kiss, and I'd call you back for one more. If I knew it would be the last time that I'd hear your voice lifted up in praise, I would videotape each action and word so I could play them back day after day. If I knew it would be the last time I would be there to share your day, I would not say you'll have so many more so I can let just this one slip away. I would not think that there's always tomorrow to make up for an oversight and that we always get a second chance to make everything just right. So just in case today is all I get, I'd like to say how much I love you. And I hope that we never forget that tomorrow is not promised to anyone, young or old alike. And today may be the last chance that you get to hold your loved one tight. So if you're waiting for tomorrow, why not do it today? For if tomorrow never comes, you'll surely regret the day that you didn't take the extra time for a smile, a hug, or a kiss, and you were too busy to grant someone what turned out to be their one last wish. So hold your loved one close today and whisper in their ear and tell them how much you love them and that you'll always hold them dear. And take time to say, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, or it's okay." And if tomorrow never comes, you'll have no regrets about today. Morey's passing cannot diminish the important ways that he touched your lives, and your grief cannot take away the happiness that you shared. In your memories of him, may you find comfort. In your family and friends, may you find love. And in your hearts, may you find the strength to help you through this very difficult time. So may the memory of Moshe Eliyahu ben Chaim, of Morey E. Slodki, always be a blessing to us. May it inspire us to do better and to be better. And in his honor, may God grant you comfort and peace in this very difficult time. Amen. It's now my honor to call upon daughter Lisa, who has some thoughts to share with us.
You might have to bear with me here, see if I can get through this. want to say a few things about my father, and about, what a great example that he set, and how he represented so many of the values that I aspire to, and how he showed me that in both the big ways and just the many little things he did every day, especially when no one was looking. He was a good citizen of all his communities. In science, he always helped the people he worked with. He let them use equipment, whereas other people might be territorial or competitive. He was always there to answer questions. He sent samples all over the world, every request he ever got, and that continued well past his retirement. In the Jewish community, he had leadership roles in both Peoria and Chicago, and was always there to lead a minyan whenever needed, or daily services, or to just step in whatever needed to be done. He was a good citizen of his local community. He was a blood donor consistently for decades. He was also a good citizen of his neighborhood. Just a memory that I have, that I'll always have, that really had an impression on me very young, was being in the car with him, and we would always drive home a certain way around the block, and this time it was evening, and he took the other way around. And I said, "Oh, why are we going the other way?" And he said, "Well, see that house at the top of the hill? I go the other way at night because I don't want to shine my headlights into their living room." And that, to me, is the kind of guy he was, that always tried to do the right thing. He didn't have to try, it was just his nature. And he would take any opportunity to try and help or do the right thing. I want to say a little bit about him from when he was younger. He was a very formal guy, as everybody here knows. And he went to college early, and he was younger than most of the other students, but he was going to school with a lot of veterans that were much older than him, and they sort of guided him and taught him how to dress properly, which he carried with him through the rest of his life. As many people know, he would not leave the house without wearing a jacket. And he would even garden in his old dress clothes. He was a true Renaissance man in the classic sense of his era. He had an amazing book collection. It was every different area of study. It was history, art, architecture. He was curious about everything and wanted to learn. Even after he retired, he loved reading his scientific journals, and was even reading them a few weeks ago in the hospital room. He loved classical and jazz music. He loved gardening. He knew all the Latin names of the flowers, of course. And he loved art. He expressed, I think, his own artistic sensibility through designing the house we lived in, and also his science. He found it to be a creative practice and a form of art to have a well-designed experiment. And I always thought he was cool. Like, I always thought being a scientist was cool. He was brilliant, and I also liked that he never dumbed things down for us. if we would maybe be in third grade and ask him a third grade level science question, he'd give us a grad level answer. And most of the time I wouldn't understand, but I liked that he didn't dumb it down, and I liked the idea that I could try to rise to the occasion, try to understand, or at least maybe he thought somehow I could. I enjoyed being young and kind of being his little helper sometimes, whether it was in the garden and just being at the base of the ladder as he handed me branches from a tree. That's something that I've come in adulthood to love gardening, even though I just kind of was resentful of the chore of having to water it all summer. He also exposed me to tools. I work with my hands for a living, and it was really like down in the basement, his workbench, being his right-hand man, fixing things around the house, just seeing all the cool things on the workbench, little parts of everything, tools of all kinds. I loved it down there, and I loved that we did stuff together. Later I sort of became his helper more and more through the years. And then I really loved that. I loved all our lunches we had and all the time we spent together, and how we, as time went on, spent more and more and more until he was a part of my everyday life. And I think our relationship deepened, and even deepened to another level that I didn't even know existed during his stay at the hospital. And I think it was there that he was still teaching me some of these lessons. Because he was really himself till the end. He was a great guy. He was nice. He was polite, respectful, calm, didn't complain, had a positive attitude. And as anybody that's been in the hospital knows, you get interrupted maybe every 2 hours, and sometimes you're in the middle of the night, you're asleep, and the nurse wakes you up to do something uncomfortable. And he never complained. He just said, go ahead and do what you need to do. And he always thanked them. And the nurses were all really moved by how sweet and gentle and polite he was. And I think it says something about him as a man, that even at his worst times, he was still his best self. And I'm gonna miss him.
Thank you, Lisa. I would say that you painted a great picture of your dad. So Morey was very involved in the Loop Synagogue, and it's my honor to call upon its president, Lee Zolden, to offer a few words.
I just have very few words. First of all, I want to tell one anecdote about my first relationship with Morey when I first started going to Loop, and we have a mechitza minyan, and so our mechitza is kind of semi-opaque, and so you can't really see very much of what's going on in front of it, and I sat behind it, and so the guys never really knew that I was there or paid very much attention, and Morey was the first person that came up to me and actually acknowledged that I existed, that I was in the room, and he made it safe for me to daven every day. I felt like, well, I had a friend there somewhere on the other side of the mechitza. And the other story I want to share is that as president, I occasionally send out a lot of text messages about people who pass on, and Morey was no exception. And without exception, people answered me. There is not, people you send out this a lot, and people go, okay, thanks for letting me know, or they don't even respond. And with Morey, people came back, and they said he was a truly nice man, a gentleman. There was always something positive, and I feel honored that I was able to collect all these comments and receive them from all my congregants. So thank you.
And thank you, Lee. And now one of his friends at the synagogue, David Weiner, would like to offer some words.
Well, I have to admit that I wasn't prepared to do this, but I was happy when I was asked. And I have to say that I met Morey when I was starting to say Kaddish for my mother. And I had gone to another synagogue, and I didn't find them to be all that friendly. And I walked into Mincha Marav service at the Chicago Loop Synagogue, and there was Morey greeting everybody. And from that, and we kind of connected because I'm a federal employee, and he had been a federal employee most of his life. And so we kind of connected on that. But I started to think about, who is this Morey Slodki? And I finally realized he's the guy on TV, the most interesting man in the world. If you Google Morey Slodki, you get page after page of stuff. This was really a guy who had a really full life, both professionally, religiously. He just did everything. It was just amazing when you take a look at what he did. Although I used to joke with him a little bit, the only other food chemist I had ever heard of was Clark Griswold from the vacation movies. And he actually thought that was funny. So I was glad that he thought that was funny. But this is a guy who, he could talk about anything. And as something you brought up, Lisa, he could, was interested in everything. And I used to think about, he would come to services on Saturday morning, and then he would need to do something until Saturday afternoon services. So I think he had a deal at the Art Institute that they would let him walk in without showing any IDs or anything. He didn't have to carry anything. So he could get into the Art Institute and look at paintings all day until he had to go back to the synagogue for mincha. And it just shows his interest was, just chemistry magazines or scientific magazines. He really was into everything. But what I also remember is every Friday night when I attend services, and I think about when I used to go to the Chicago Loop Synagogue on Friday nights, and Morey would daven every Friday night. And he had the most beautiful voice. And I think about his beautiful voice, especially the person now doesn't have the most beautiful voice. But I think about just how wonderful Morey was, that he was willing to, lead services and be friendly to people and talk about almost everything. And every day he's not there, I miss him. So thank you, Morey.
That was really nice, David. You sang a great song about him. And also, another one of his friends and also congregants, would like to say a few words, Les Blau.
It's an honor to be able to speak about Morey. There's so many memories that come flooding over me, so I want you to be able to get out before sunset, so I'll just try and limit myself to one or two. One of them reminds me of the fact that, as the rabbi said, we never know what the next day will bring. And I was at services one day, Morey got called to the Torah, as he often did. And there's a prayer you say called Gomel. When you bench Gomel, it means that you've escaped some kind of danger or some potential danger. And Morey got up there and he benched Gomel. And I noticed after he did that, he had a bruise. So I went over to him after services. So what happened? He said, well, my car got a little too close to somebody else's car. And I said, Morey, tell me, did you get a ticket? He goes, I think maybe we both did, but I did get a ticket. I said, Morey, I've got a great deal for you. A free legal service. So we went to court together and I got the ticket thrown out. And he insisted on taking my first wife of blessed memory, Sarita, and me to Mitsuyan, which was a kosher Chinese restaurant that's been gone for so long that we know that neither Morey or I were youngsters. And we had a very nice lunch together. And then I remember that I had actually violated what Morey always told me, the 11th commandment. You probably know it. No, you don't remember it? Take a chemist to lunch. Morey always told me that was the 11th commandment, and he wound up taking us to lunch. So I was never able to honor the 11th commandment. He always used to joke about it. And people talk about how Morey was always of service to people, and that brings me to the second and other thing I wanted to share with you. I had a court case downstate near Springfield, and I had to go down from time to time. And on one of those occasions, it was after my dad had passed away, and I tried very, very hard to say Kaddish every day. And I was on my way back from Springfield to Chicago, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get to Chicago before really late at night. And so this was one of those, as you know, Morey had a foot in two camps, in Peoria and in Chicago. And that was true for a long time. He spent time up here, and he still had his house in Peoria. And this was, I believe, in the year 2002. And in those days, he did still have the Peoria house. So I called him up, and I said, I don't know if it's possible to have a service this evening. He said, don't worry about it. Well, he worried about it. He made a lot of phone calls. And when I finally rolled into town at whatever ungodly hour it was, there were a minion of people waiting to say Kaddish with, and he made it happen. And they were from all different walks of life, because in Peoria, there are people from all different walks of life, and he was able to bring them together. And I thought, well, that was the end of it. Now it's time to get back on the road. He said, no. You'll come to my house. And my wife and I went there. And of course, by this point, he had actually learned to cook. And we had a very, very pleasant meal with him at his house in Peoria. And that's the kind of guy he was, going out of his way to people. He was a man of courtly manner. Okay? And if somebody had told you that he was actually a descendant of some English king, you could almost believe it because of the way he carried himself, because of his formal approach to dressing nicely in front of Hashem and his brother, his fellow man. I guess there's one final incident that I remember, and it's been so many years. Here's Harry, he's all taller than I am. But I remember years ago when he was a tiny baby, and Morey was all excited. There was going to be a Pidyon Haben, a redemption of the firstborn son, which is a tradition we have around 30 days after the birth of the son. And Morey was so happy and excited to have Harry there and to participate in it. And it was a bracha to Morey to be able to watch Harry grow up and to be there at his bar mitzvah, and to have him part of Harry's life. I think with all the roots Morey had in Peoria and the love he had for the city, and boy, did he have love for that city. You know, when it came to Peoria, he was the guy that was involved in many aspects of the cemetery there. The helping people out with the memorials and the headstones and the Hebrew names and all that stuff. But he had the draw of his daughters and eventually his son-in-law, and of course eventually Harry. And those draws are so powerful. And so he pulled those roots up. And I don't think Peoria ever left him completely, any more than he will leave us completely. It was in his heart, just as he will always be in ours.
Thank you, Les. And by the way, now I know who to call on my next speeding ticket. And now it's my honor to call upon son-in-law Steve, son-in-love Steve, I should say.
Thank you all for coming. I'm going to read a few words from Nina. I'm grateful to Dad for designing a unique and comfortable Scandinavian mid-century prairie-style art gallery home with a dream garden and a birdhouse for wrens and a Japanese patio in Peoria. He gave Lisa and me a good education by sending us to schools, taking us to synagogue, showing us how to use tools to build things, teaching us how to take care of that dream garden, being our tour guide at museums and on trips, listening to us and giving us good advice about life. I'm also grateful to Dad for taking such good care of Mom when she was ill. Dad has been a wonderful grandfather to Harry, who will always have good memories of him. And now I'll make a few of my own remarks. My intention is to keep them brief. But as we all know, intentions are one thing, really, reality is another, and as you will presently discover. As we all know, my father-in-law, Morey Slodki, recently left us at the age of 94. I'm reminded of what Bob Hope said at the funeral of the great Jack Benny. He was stingy to the end. He only gave us 80 years, and it wasn't enough. And the same is the case with the man I considered more of a father than a father-in-law. 94 years wasn't nearly enough. Mitch Albom once titled a book, Tuesdays with Morey. Well, we had Saturdays with Morey. Nina and I would drive downtown from Arlington Heights and pick him up from his apartment. This might take a bit of time, but once he came down, we would make the short trek to Chicago Loop Synagogue. Many times I would be the only one coming downtown for Shabbat services, and when services were over, a group of us would walk back, including Rabbi Vishny and our good friend of blessed memory, Mike Misselman. It would end up just the two of us. Perhaps we would interrupt our walk to sit by the umbrella statues near the Chicago River. The conversation would be wide-ranging, and often I would leave with a lot more knowledge than when I arrived. Morey was known as an accomplished scientist. He showed his talent early, entering college in his mid-teens. And I see we're represented by both universities he attended, Iowa and Illinois. He traveled the world delivering lectures and kept current, even into advanced retirement, by reading his beloved chemical and engineering magazine. David, you alluded to the Google search. I did one too. One site revealed 44 research works with 1,321 citations. They include such titles as, I hope I'm not going to mess this up, Influence of the Culture Medium on the Synthesis of Alpha-D-Glucans by Streptococcus crassitas AHT. Another one was Structure of the Low Molecular Weight Dextrans synthesized by a D-glucosyl transferase GTFS3 of Streptococcus subrinus. But as Lisa said, he was a true Renaissance man. It wasn't just science. He had a vast knowledge of a wide range of subjects. He enjoyed literature. He said his favorite book was Ulysses, reason being that the novel takes place on his birthday, June 16th. When I stayed over in the guest room over the high holidays, my eyes would often stray over his books, and I noticed that his library included The Settlers, written by Meyer Levin, who, like Morey, grew up on the west side of Chicago. And actually, if you pick up a book by Meyer Levin called The Old Bunch, which was written in 1937, you'll find out what the world of a young Morey Slodki was like when he grew up on the west side. He also appreciated fine art and architecture. One of my fondest memories is of spending a break in high holiday services with a visit to the Art Institute. And he would often comment on the genius of Chicago architecture, noting in particular the use of plazas in many downtown buildings. He was an architect himself. He drew up the plans for his longtime home in Peoria. He and I also shared a fondness for baseball, and he was over at our place to watch Mark Burley toss his perfect game. In fact, taped to his refrigerator door was a newspaper clipping of The Catch, as Dwayne Wise's miraculous grab was called, which salvaged Burley's masterpiece. Of course, a huge chunk of Morey's life was invested in the Chicago Loop Synagogue, which he served as a vice president. In fact, I fondly recall joining him on the dais during one memorable Scholar-in-Residence weekend. Morey was a deeply religious man. He will be fondly remembered by his fellow congregants for his participation in services at Loop, and David did an excellent job and Les too, of telling us how he would participate and often lead services. He was someone whose principles and practice were perfectly aligned. More than anything, he loved serving humanity, both through his work and his worship. He was a devoted son, and I was happy to see that we could honor his father by naming our son Harry. He was also a devoted husband, and I will never forget the wise words he imparted on my wedding day. Always listen to your wife. As you all know, I took those words completely to heart. He deeply loved his daughters and made sure they were taken care of. That devotion was returned in spades. My wife would lovingly prepare food for me to take to him on the way to work downtown. And Lisa has been absolutely heroic in her care of him, especially during the last months. What's in a name? With Morey, as it turns out, it was everything. Slodki means sweet in Polish, and this was above all a sweet man. And it also applied to his profession as a carbohydrate chemist. He was a blessing to us all, and in the end, he was blessed by being able to live independently in his own place to the end. I would like to think it was his reward for a life well lived. In the words of Shakespeare, his life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man.
Well, as I sat and listened to everyone and all these incredible stories and remembrances, I don't know how many of you have seen the play Hamilton, but one of the themes of Hamilton is how to pass on your legacy. And Steve, you mentioned it slightly. There's a line that goes through the entire play from beginning to end. Who lives, who dies, who will tell your story? Who will keep your flame, and who will remember your name? You will tell his story. You will keep his flame, and all of us will remember his name. I ask the family to please rise for a moment. El Mole Rachamim Shochem Bamromim. Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina. B'ma'alot Kedoshim Utehorim Kezoar Horakia Masirim Et Nismat Moshe Eliyahu Ben Chaim Sholach Li Olamo. B'gan Edin Tehei Menuchato Ana Baal Harachamim Hastirehu B'Seter Kenafecha Li Olamim. Utzror B'Tzoror Achayim Et Nishmato Aronoi hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar amen. El Mole Rachamim, O exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Morey E. Slodki, who has gone unto his eternal home. O merciful one, we ask that he find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And as one united family, let us answer. Amen. And you may be seated.